Welcome. Welcome to the Oral History Interviews by Team Coast Guard. I'm Richard Stephenson, the National Auxiliary Historian, your host. The purpose of Team Coast Guard Oral History Interview is to gather and record the experiences of Coast Guard veterans and auxiliarists. The interview you are about to see is with legendary golf professional Arnold Palmer. In 1951, Mr. Palmer enlisted in the Coast Guard. We will learn about Mr. Palmer's experiences in the Coast Guard and what the Coast Guard has meant to Mr. Palmer.
Of course, I'm very proud of the fact that I was in the Coast Guard. I think it's a wonderful outfit.
Do you think that the young people today, including athletes, could be better grounded in their focus if they had the same kind of experience in the military?
Well, I've been a little outspoken on that subject, and the reason is that I feel that young people need the kind of training that they would get in one of the military outfits, whether it be the Coast Guard or Marines or Army, Navy, whatever it might be. I found that some of us are not as quick learning as others, and in my own case, I was at Wake Forest for 3.5 years, and my roommate got killed in an automobile accident. I was pretty distraught over that and decided that I needed to get away, and I joined the Coast Guard. And 3 years in the Coast Guard and then back to Wake Forest. And it was tremendous difference. The knowledge that I gained, the maturity that I gained in the Coast Guard was unbelievable. It matured me, it made me a better person for the world, and I believe that in my own right. So the military isn't just restrictions and military duties, it's learning, and it's very important that young people have that opportunity to learn and to know themselves a little better, and I think the military helps put that in the right perspective.
Mm-hmm. What made you decide to join the Coast Guard?
Well, I thought it was an outfit that I wanted. It was special. I thought it was special in that it specialized in something. And being a Coast Guardsman, I ended up being a lifeguard in the ocean for a while at Cape May. And all the things that the Coast Guard did, I thought were very exciting. And had I stayed and longer, I would have probably gone into the flying end of the Coast Guard, which I also think. And what they're doing now, if you watch some of the shows that are on television, I think that's specifically one of the reasons that I like the Coast Guard so much.
When you enlisted in the Coast Guard from Wake Forest, you went to Washington, D.C. to enlist, is that correct?
That is correct.
Then you went on to Cape May
for my basic training. My first assignment after training at Cape May was I was in the training department. I was kept on to do physical education, to teach various maneuvers as far as personal protection was concerned for recruits, such as judo and some of the things that were common, but help troops know a little more about what to do in a case of confrontation. And in that process, I was there for 6 months doing that special training. And like always, you always have someone in your group that is objective, let's say. And one guy thought that he knew more about what I was doing than I did. And unfortunately, I had an accident with him. And I didn't have a captain's mask, but I was close to it. The captain understood the situation, and that's when I was transferred. And he gave me a choice of selecting my station and I took either Washington. He said name 2 or 3, and I named Washington and Cleveland. And as it turned out, I got Cleveland, which was really great for me. And I spent the remainder of my enlistment in Cleveland, Ohio.
I was born in Cleveland and then grew up in Ashtabula.
Oh, really?
So I can remember the Coast Guard station there.
Yeah. Well, for a while I was in the Keith building, and then they moved us down to the lake, and I worked out of there for 2 years.
But only during the week.
That's correct. Well, even some days they couldn't find me. I was on the golf course.
Okay. In your book again, it mentions that while you were in Cleveland and you spent the weekends playing golf and at headquarters working with the auxiliary, and I would like to know the kinds of things you did with respect to the auxiliary during the week.
Well, I was a yeoman in charge of the and worked for the commander, who was in charge of the 9th Coast Guard District Auxiliary, and I worked for him for a year or two, and then they moved me back to headquarters, where I became a photographer, and I did the identification for all the Coast Guardsmen in the 9th Coast Guard District. I traveled to all the stations and did photos, and then took those all back to the headquarters and did the identification cards for all the Coast Guard personnel in the 9th District.
You've been to Ashtabula.
Oh, yes. I've been to Mackinac, I've been everywhere. Been to the whole shooting match.
Were you involved in any of the auxiliary programs at that time, such as public education or patrols or member training?
No, I didn't get into the public part of the auxiliary. I did all the paperwork and did all the checking on the auxiliary, and was aware of all the things that had to be passed through the auxiliary, the rules, the regulations for auxiliary personnel.
Mm-hmm. From your book, I gathered that you had a number of experiences with officers that really looked out for your well-being as well. Would you tell me some of those experiences?
Well, no question about it. My first boss was Commander Weishi, who was the son of the commandant of the Coast Guard at the time. And then I had my next leader was Commander Potts, who was in charge of the 9th Coast Guard District Auxiliary. and then eventually I was transferred back to headquarters for the job that I had, the photography job. And my boss was really an admiral, Admiral Rainey, who we made a deal that if I would stay there in the 9th District and teach him to play golf, it would be okay.
What was your most enjoyable experience in the Coast Guard?
Well, I think simply being in the Coast Guard was something that I enjoyed. I was my intentions were to eventually get out and play golf, and of course my boss, the Admiral, had suggested that I go to training at the academy, and that was fine, and I was flattered that he wanted me to do that, but at the same time that meant an additional enlistment for me, and I was primarily ready to get out and give my shot at the PGA Tour.
When Mr. Palmer entered the Coast Guard, he was already a well-known amateur golfer. After completing his tour of duty, there was no doubt in his mind that his service in the Coast Guard made him better prepared for a career in professional golf and the worldwide experiences to follow. An entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and an ambassador of goodwill. We, the Coast Guard team, thank Mr. Palmer for his patriotism and support. With this interview and more like it, the preservation of the Coast Guard legacy is assured. Your support and assistance will be greatly appreciated. Semper Paratus.